Hey there guys, welcome back to the deck profile with yours truly, Paul Reisman. Today we are taking a look at Dan Rowland's Grimm Kaguya-1 Tag Hook Combo Extravaganza. So without further ado guys, let's dig right in.
This session brought to you by Odyssey Games for pre-orders and sealed product, CCG Prime for tons of singles and supplies, Cardo Doko for international rulers looking for products, and FoulLibrary.com for articles and wonderful deck lists,
as well as our guest lecturer members King Pearlshine, Vite Ramen, Mognite, and Darren Noblock.
Class is in session.
Alright, so we're playing OG Grimm the Fairy Tale Prince alongside the Crimson Moon's Battleground, which allows him to tag with Kaguya-1. We are not flipping Kaguya, as most decks do not now. Instead, we're using her front side as a way to put chance standbys into the chance standby zone for 1 will cheaper. It's going to go a long way in this deck, because there is a definitive defense engine that utilizes chance standbys. And so, good cards are good, but let's get into the deck. So, the whole point of this deck is to get Hook the Pirate out in a way that makes the most sense, to walk back stones and do so at pivotal times in the turn, so that your opponent cannot do things that they want to do. And against my deck, Dan used Hook to walk back my stones, and so with no fairies and no stones to break seal on Dominatus, I was never able to get my J Ruler out. So except for one time, there was one time, but other than that, the deck was just completely locked out by this card, and so that's been cause for a little bit of concern from some folks now that Captain Hook is off the ban list. Most notably, the channel's own Mike Rance is a little concerned about this guy, but for good reason. This is a powerful fairy tale. It gets a lot of support from the years of fairy tale support that we've had in the game, and so let's take a look at the broader deck list. So Dan is playing a Draw Engine of Dark Alice Rabbit Princess. It also protects his graveyards, and he's got ways to utilize hooks from the graveyard, so this card is actually kind of relevant for that effect as well. But this allows him to dig through his deck and get rid of cards in his hand that he doesn't need, so he's able to run 4 copies of certain cards. He's also playing Cheshire Cat to dig deep, put things from his hand back on top of the deck in case they're clogging up his hand. Super relevant in the fact that if you get a hook in your opening hand, even after mulligans, that can happen sometimes, you can just put it on top of the deck and then play to tell a fairy tale to put it into your hand and then into the field. So we've gotten a new ruling on how this works now. It used to be that you would get double the enter effects off of this because of how it's worded and because of how game mechanics work now compared to when this card was printed. The company has ruled that this triggers its enter ability is really more of a mechanics text at this point. It doesn't cause the enter ability to trigger a second time. So the idea is that you would play this, trigger the enter ability, and then something like Hook would come in, and then it would see that it entered the field too, and it would enter again, essentially, and walking back 4 stones or 4 resonators as opposed to only 2. That's not how it works anymore. Thank God. But we do have Tale of Fairy Tale into Hook now. As I said, he can walk back 2 magic stones or 2 resonators on your opponent's field, and then he's got a 10-10 stat line, which is certainly not bad, given that the effect is also really powerful. In addition to that suite, he plays 1 Hamlin, Sound of Temptation, to take control of his opponent's stuff, and surprisingly, you can take control of singular stuff on your opponent's field quite often. There will be times where he just takes this out. This is a really good way of getting around things like Barrier and Eternal, which is kind of funny to have in blue. He also plays Tinkerbell, Spirit of the Light Trials. Personally, I would up this thing too. This thing is amazing. There are ways for you to just draw cards and get a 3 cost 10-10 onto the field with Drain, which is surprisingly relevant in this meta game. So card's good. Of course, he also mentioned that he would like to have more 2-drop resonators in the deck to actually make use of the board wipe effect. So that's also something to keep in mind as well. But there's going to be times in which you can tell a fairy tale into one of your main deck 2-drops and then just pay the activate ability to bring this thing out, right? He's also playing 2 Minfia, Storytelling Girl. I said you should consider this card because then in situations in which it doesn't feel safe to bring Hook out, you have a way of making your Dark Alices and Cheshire Cats bigger and more threatening. This card is actually really, really good, especially now that Grimm actually has Tag. He can make good use of this effect. It also really helps him to make use of the Campanella engine here, using Fountain of the Oblivion Moon as a draw engine in times where he feels like his hand is getting low. That can happen, especially in decks with like Look of Corruption or decks that want to discard your hand. Having this backup is really kind of nice. But I thought, hey, you should probably put in this engine because otherwise you're looking at a 0-2 that you're hoping your opponent is going to attack into or attack you with, and you can block with this card, right? And it's just kind of just sitting there until that happens, right? So that kind of sucks. So Minfia is there for that reason. He plays 3 Cage of Mother Goose in a Regalia meta. This card is very relevant right now. It has Mastery Fairy Tale essentially, and it just allows you to remove something from the game as long as it's on the field. Really relevant card, really powerful in my opinion. He's also playing 4 Misty Woods, which is not a card we've seen a lot of in the game's history, but in this deck it makes a lot of sense. In combination with Keep the Faith, this is something that allows you to essentially reborn something for 2, so your hooks are now coming out for 2 instead of for 3 or even for 5, which is very relevant. It also allows you to look at the top 4 and get one of your draw engine pieces like Dark Alice or Cheshire Cat or your Minfias, your Tinkerbell. Maybe you want to set your opponent back on your turn so you have a Dark Bokuro in hand in here, which is really helpful as well. Misty Woods is just kind of amazing, and the fact that it works so well with Keep the Faith is wild to me. This can bring back any 1-drop from the graveyard, so if you're looking at a couple of hooks in the graveyard and you have a Forest of the Lost Misty Woods, essentially you can Keep the Faith that back, look at the top 4, and then for 2, quick cast out a hook from your graveyard. This combination of cards is kind of insane as a core. We talked about Dark Bokuro, Campanella, the Fountain, and now we're going to talk about Prison in the Lunar Lake. This is not a quick cast card, so cards like Fair Spell cannot cancel it. It's also a 3-drop, so Girion cannot stop it. But for 1, you can put in the Chance Standby Zone, and whenever your opponent tries to put an enter effect from a Resonator onto the chase, you cancel that ability and destroy that Resonator. It does not target. So this is really good at getting around Barrier, and it's one of the stronger blue cards that we've seen in the game's history. It's kind of wild that this card is actually a blue card in a lot of ways, but it's been kind of sequestered to the remnants of Alice Cluster after just rotation and stuff like that, but now we finally get it back in Wanderers. This card is absolutely fantastic, right next to Signs of the Future. In decks that like to go wide, especially in token decks like Stein and like Tina, getting this thing out and making sure that your opponent just doesn't get those cards anymore, it's very relevant. It's also really relevant against Niklaus if he's able to make his flowers into resonators. You just remove those resonators from the field, and now he doesn't have 2 more flowers to bring back with Super Bloom. Very relevant card, very relevant. Setting the Sage of Providence is here because this is a combo deck, and you need to protect your combo. In fact, I think in one of my games, whether it made it into the footage or not, I'm not entirely sure, but I tried to Lorite a hook trigger, and this said, oh, by the way, you can't do that because you can't target my stuff. Nice blocker, though. Very funny card to have. Of course, with Prison in the Lunar Lake, you need to have a certain amount of water magic stones. Your 4 sea stones are not technically water magic stones, which is why he plays 4 light vapors and 2 Stone of the Dragonoids to make sure that he has at least 1 water magic stone in order to proc that effect. He's also playing in the sideboard 3 Portal of Truth. This is also really relevant. So in the event that I somehow get my end board with Tina and I buff all of my field with Tina's effect, Portal of Truth can literally target anything that is a resonator. So this card is really relevant, especially since, again, it doesn't have quick cast, so you can't Fair Spell it. It is a 2-drop, so you can't Girion it. Those are two really relevant cancels that we have in the game right now, and this just simply gets around all of that. That being said, Persephone, really good card against chance standbys as a name. But this card is really strong, especially in the sideboard if you're playing against like certain buff decks, right? 3 falling into the cracks of time against Tina. It is apparently also a silence because essentially I don't get to do anything on my turn if this thing actually resolves. Spirits in the Crimson Moon. This is a really good way of getting rid of additions and regalia right now. So if you're a Fairy Tale player, don't sleep on this card. It's a quick cast Fairy Tale that you can grab with Grimm. Very solid. Definitely something worth having in your sideboard at this point, I would think. You've got the second Dark Bokuro, another cage for removal, Skyscraper Giant. This thing is absolutely terrifying if you get it out, and you can on turn 3 with Tale of Fairy Tale. It's very funny. Prison in the Lunar Lake at a 3rd copy, Campanella, Tinkerbell, and just for the lulz, Schrödinger the Harlequin Phenomena. It just doppels something in your graveyard, and so you can do funny things like get another hook. So it's really funny. This deck, I love it. It was very fun to play against. It was a really good back and forth in a lot of ways, and it was just able to dirtle and push Tina off in several points during the game. So congratulations to Dan for not only winning the match, but having this really cool deck and utilizing Captain Hook the Pirate. I was very fond of this deck. So guys, if you are also fond of this deck, let us know down in the comment section down below. Are there things you would change, things that, you know, aren't quite your play style that you would do differently? Let us know down there. That's the best way that we have to interact with you, our Force of Will community. Also, ring that bell and hit that like button if you like content like this, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Until next time, guys, this has been Paul. Talk to you later.